Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending the coffee chat this morning. We have more than 150 participants registered for our event today, many from beyond the Sacramento region. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with the Regional Water Authority, we represent 21 water providers serving 2 million people in the Sacramento region. RWA is a regional convener focused on coordinating the efforts of water providers to provide a resilient water supply that not only benefits the Sacramento region, but the statewide water system. We take a watershed or supershed approach to this work, which extends from the Sierras to the groundwater basin hundreds of feet below the urban surface. RWA's Coffee and Conversation series is part of our outreach and advocacy program. If you'd like to learn more, I invite you to review our 2021 Advocacy Program Report, which you can find on our website at rwah2o.org. Now, some housekeeping announcements, which you can see from our slide. This webinar is being recorded. We've received dozens of questions for Chair Esquivel today, and we'll try to get through as many as we possibly can. In addition, feel free to submit questions as we go through the Q&A button on your screen. Live transcript is available by clicking the live transcript button on the bottom of your screen. Now, let's get started. It's my pleasure to welcome and introduce my friend, Councilmember Jeff Harris. Jeff Harris was elected in November 2014 to represent the 3rd City Council District of the City of Sacramento. He is a longtime board member of the Regional Water Authority and the Sacramento Groundwater Authority. Additionally, Councilmember Harris is on the site's Joint Powers Authority. Since taking office, Councilmember Harris has been a strong advocate for parks and neighborhoods. He has been a leading voice on the council to address the needs of homelessness and the impacts of people living outdoors. After spending 30 years as a small business owner, building scores of quality homes and additions in the Sacramento region, Jeff Harris became a champion for fiscal restraint on the City Council. Jeff has been a strong advocate for small businesses and economic development. He also serves as the chair of the Lower American River Conservancy Program Advisory Committee, the Council Standing Committee on Water Issues, and also has served for 6 years as both chair and vice chair on the Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency. Now, let me say this. Jeff is a true friend to the Regional Water Authority, our members, and the water community. We have always been able to count on Jeff to listen, understand, and carry our interest forward. Thank you so much, Jeff, for all the work and for you being here today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jim. It's a real pleasure to be here. As you know, I'm a strong proponent of our Regional Water Authority. And I want to thank all the guests here today and all the colleagues who work in the water field. It's obviously very essential to life in California and becoming more critical in the face of climate change. Our region is way better off because of the Regional Water Authority. We have, through this organization, a better ability to manage our water resources and to assure that we're in good shape moving into the future. The RWA's mission is to serve, represent, and align the interests of regional water providers and stakeholders for the purpose of improving water supply reliability, availability, quality, and affordability. It's becoming more challenging to achieve all of those goals, but RWA is making it easier to meet those challenges here in the Sacramento region and across the state. I think because of our collaboration in the Regional Water Authority, we have a stronger voice and a better collaborative association with the state, which is really why we're here today to have a coffee conversation with Chair Esquivel of the State Water Resources Control Board. The reason this happened, actually, we had an event at the Department of Utilities headquarters in Sacramento. It was a presser to express to the community the severity of the drought and offer alternatives about water conservation. Wade Crowfoot was there, Mr. Esquivel was there, the mayor of Sacramento, myself, and others, to really highlight this issue, which is so important at this time. So I'm really delighted that Mr. Esquivel was there, and I approached him and asked if he might be willing to do this coffee conversation. Very happy he said yes. The last time we did this with Carla Namus, it was a very informative session and very well run by Jim and RWA, and I think that you'll find this to be a great session as well. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Esquivel. He was appointed to the State Water Quality Control Board by then Governor Jerry Brown in 2017, and then again in 2019, Governor Newsom made him the chair of the Water Board. Previously, he was Assistant Secretary for Federal Water Policy at the California Natural Resources Agency in the Governor's Washington, D.C. office. I believe it's there where I first met Mr. Esquivel. Pretty sure we were on a junket talking about flood control, and it was great to meet him there, and it's been really fun for me to have some association with him in the years since. For more than 8 years prior to that, he worked for U.S. Senator Barbara Boxer, and he wore a lot of hats in that position. He was the legislative assistant covering agriculture, Native American water, oceans, and nutrition portfolios, in addition to being the director of information and technology. He's a native California, grew up in Coachella Valley, went to school at UC Santa Barbara, and I have a feeling you're going to find Joaquin to be a very interesting and energetic person. So Joaquin, welcome. Thank you for being here, and I look forward to this conversation very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Harris. That's a very kind introduction. Thank you, Jim, as well, and really just appreciate the Regional Water Authority for this opportunity to be here with you all, to be able to reflect on what is not a small number of challenges before us, particularly with water. But just want to, even before we start talking about water, take a step back and acknowledge that we're in some challenging times. You look at the COVID pandemic, the response, the incredible move of so many of our work and our agencies to remote. The fact that I think many of you are maybe acquainted, if you've seen our board meetings or any of many of my engagements these past years with this room, these posters back here, the books on this shelf, and here all have had to manage what are, again, a lot of personal challenges that have stemmed from death and the terrible loss that many of us have had to work through these last years. On top of that, we also have a good amount of unrest, distrust in government, an insurrection that's being covered in the news, decisions being made by courts that are impacting many lives throughout this nation. And it's not to speak about politics here, but it's hard to not comment on what is a pretty complex set of discussions happening in our society about who we are, what our communities are going to look like in the future, and how we here, importantly, have a common vision amongst one another. And for me, it brings me back to the fact that the State Water Board here, a 50-year institution, 50 years ago, well, we were discussing many of this very similar things. Our civil rights, our passage of incredible legislation, Porter Cologne, that created the state board that united a water rights office and a water quality office. Then, our population was about 17 million, and our legislature and our leaders, Governor Reagan, all very much understood that if California is going to grow, we're going to support our communities. We need to be able to protect water quality. We need to be able to manage our water resources in a way that acknowledges that quantity and quality are part of the same discussion, and that if we're going to maximize our resources, we need to do better by them. And on top of that, again, there was a civil rights movement and a discussion that was very much about environmental justice. And here, ensuring with the Safe Drinking Water Act, with the Clean Water Act, these huge national pieces of legislation, that there is universal access to clean water, there is universal access to drinking water. And we're not there yet. 50 years on. We have huge inequities in our society still yet, but a lot of progress and a lot of hope. And so as someone of a generation here that I feel that, we're increasingly having to think through not just the challenges on water, say, but what it is that we are all here building in common toward. I just want to acknowledge that I appreciate your time, everyone's time here, because there is a lot going on, and you providing here this discussion with me means a lot. And so here I am, I am here in my office still. I have a cup of green tea, not coffee, but prepared and glad to gloss a little quickly on what we're doing on water. So the drought, it is incredibly front of mind, obviously, as we've heard from Commissioner Camille Touton just recently, a week or two ago in Washington, D.C., the Colorado River is going to need to conserve about 2.5 plus million acre feet of water just here in 2023. So when we think of the challenges that we're facing, I think of the 2,200 households plus that are being provided hauled water currently in the state by the State Water Board, by the Department of Water Resources, and more importantly, by our partners, Self-Help, RCAC, others that are a critical part of our response in this drought. And going back to that theme of hope, I think to 2014, 2015, the depths of the last drought, where we can all say candidly, the state and we collectively were caught flat-footed, where a tremendous amount of wells went dry, communities went dry, and the mechanisms to really support and respond to those systems weren't in place. And you think of 2014 and 2015, the division of drinking water itself was still being brought over to the state board. And so we were in the middle of intense conditions and not being able to scale our response to respond to communities without water. You look now here and this last year in our response to the drought, and we've been able, and since actually the last drought, continued to have to support communities and households that had dry wells. And so the growth of that program, the expanded ability of us as a state to take care of our own people in the midst of incredible conditions, gives me hope and is a flavor of what I feel is different about this drought, although more intense. And certainly difficult to say we, again, even came out of our last drought. We had a few wet years. And in many ways, you look at the impacts, the continued drying, the impacts in our forests, the wildfire impacts. And these are just continuing challenges as opposed to, here a feeling that we came out of drought and are now in a new one. And I think that that carries through, again, both in the response that the state has been able to have to drought, but then also our investments where, Prop 1 dollars, I had the honor just, last week of being down in Southern California where Eastern Municipal Water District in Menifee was doing the groundbreaking, or not the groundbreaking, the ribbon cutting, the valve turning, I think is what we ended up actually doing for a desalter, where Prop 1 bond dollars, 22.5 million in grant dollars from the board was able to go to the project to create a new water supply. And here, so critically, in a moment where we're talking about the Colorado River, we're talking about the deficits, not just in that Bay Delta, that delta and watershed, but also our Bay Delta. And we know we need to be right-sizing our footprint. And what those local projects do, those investments actually do, is create the drought resilience we need. And so that gives me hope as well. But I think that we can all be very candid with ourselves, and the scale and the scope of the shift and change that we're seeing is pretty incredible. And you look at the deficits in soil moisture, the complexities of what it means to be in an increasingly arid climate. And I think it means that, again, these programs, these responses, this work that we're all doing, it can't come soon enough, and we need to be accelerating it. So we need to accelerate our ability to respond to communities running out of water. We also need to be accelerating our ability to conserve and invest in those projects that will continue to increase supply. And it's on the conservation note that I'll just end some comments here and just say It's an incredible thing to see what California has done since truly the 90s and the last drought. But we're going to have to see a lot more. You look across the West, and there are still opportunities for us to right-size our footprint. And it doesn't mean that you have to not bathe anymore or feel deprived in your living conditions. It really is just thinking about your outdoor, you're in your footprint, and really thinking, is my landscape appropriate for the values we have of water, for the cost to treat, to convey, to provide for ourselves the resource in an increasingly arid climate, and just match our values. And I think that when we acknowledge that our outdoor landscapes should match our climate, and can, because there are plants that have evolved here for millions of years that, believe it or not, enjoy the Mediterranean climate and have thrived. I think there's a way to really connect ourselves to the biodiversity of this state in our outdoor, view of things in a way that drives the conservation we need to see, but doesn't do so in a way that has to feel like it's a taking. And so with that, I'll stop. There's a lot going on at the board. I didn't even touch water rights and what we're doing there, but I imagine through our discussion here, which I actually appreciate more of, we can get into some of it. So thanks, everyone. I just appreciate this time and opportunity.
Good morning, Chair Esquivel, and thanks for that introduction. So you touched on the drought quite a bit and a number of other items that I think that the State Water Resources Control Board is addressing. Let's talk about drought real quick. And what do you see as the biggest challenge facing? Actually, I'm going to broaden this out and take a step back. What do you see as the biggest challenge facing California water, drought or no drought?
I think it is here. My battery is going to get low on this earpiece. Hold on one second. Let me switch my audio out as I respond. I think that, and I think I've said this a couple of times in various places. What does concern me is actually the distrust in government. You think of rates and rate setting and the complexity of it, and the need for communities to really understand their water resources on a local level, the challenges with them, the ways to continue to balance what are not uncomplicated circumstances, and the need to engage then with water agencies, let alone state agencies like the Water Board or others. And they're, without here a trust in governance, an ability to engage with it, understand, trust, and here truly it's like the gears of democracy. These are the governance and institutions that we've created around water are the way that we can most engage and affect change. And if that's broken, then we're not going to be able to make the best decisions that we need to make. We're not going to be here in this time of great challenge and complexity, going to be able to make the right choices if we don't have that as a basis of all of our work, engagement and trust and faith in our governance and, again, these institutions. And so that's drought or otherwise, that's what gives me challenge, because that without that you don't have an ability to get projects done. You don't have an ability to work across watersheds and make hard decisions, but important ones in the face of the challenges that we're all amongst. Drought, of course, being but one aspect, and increasingly, and especially this year, I think we saw it, right? Yellowstone, that incredible flooding from the monsoonal moisture coming up here in the midst of record drought, both punctuating flood and dry conditions in one water year. We saw it ourselves as we flexed between what was a record wet year nearly, with December being 120% northwards of average for the time, to the catastrophic dryness we saw in the months thereafter, and interestingly reflected also in the conservation numbers we were able to achieve, where in December we were at we achieved a 15% off of a 2020 baseline, and quickly on that baseline, the reason why we wanted to capture that was to capture what this effort was, knowing that we did come out of the last drought with carrying through with conservation. And I think it's important to acknowledge that as well, because that is part of the narrative and helps Californians understand that these are numbers we can achieve, have achieved, and look at here in the data, and specific unto many a system and household, where's our ability to do more. And so anyway, trust in governance.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I want to talk a little bit about the baseline and how we measure these things. This was a question that came in from the city of Santa Barbara, or a representative from that area. Will the Water Board consider an alternative to the 2020 baseline year for drought mandates and regulations? 2020 saw an average rainfall compared to historical precipitation patterns and was an abnormal year in water use due to impacts of the pandemic. This makes a reduction compared to the 2020 baseline potentially difficult to achieve, especially for agencies that have not seen a significant rebound in demand since 2013. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. Well, in one, important to remember that the 2020 baseline is just to create a voluntary target that we can all try to hit. And important, as we chose 2020, it was actually our year with the highest amount of, or the rather, the highest amount of usage, meaning that we thought, again, averaged over a year, that it would help, to create, that yes, there is an opportunity to conserve. We have, some faith, because if you really look at the residential gallons per capita, right, gallons per person per day, that is a fair number, right? It's not about a baseline. It's really just about what's your RGPCD. And again, you look over across the water years that we, water year types that we had, or not water year types, water years that we had chosen. And it was the one that was a bit higher. So again, there was an assuming. I think that amongst all those numbers are things like, COVID and shifts in usage month to month, and precipitation that wasn't, and we know the greatest opportunity to actually conserve, again, on the outdoor component, and what we saw again unfold over the year. So I guess I'll say that there's no perfect baseline. And I think that the desire here for the 2020 baseline was simply to capture, what is this call showing us? And I think what it's showing us that there's a lot of complexity within conservation, because it is driven by things like precipitation patterns and opportunities to conserve, where in wetter years you have greater conservation. And I think that what it helps as well is point us to the fact that it is in the outdoor landscapes that we need to be thinking about how we right size these budgets, knowing that with an increasingly warm and dry climate, those budgets will go up and up if we don't think about the landscapes, their need, and here their appropriateness for the climate that we have, lest it start to bring us starting to go in the opposite direction when it comes to the conservation targets that we know we need to be setting. So I think, again, I'm trying to make sure I make my answer clear here to you. The number, the baseline year has its complexities. It is for just a voluntary call to be able to have a reference. And I'll say, as if, this is the governor's call, and he's said publicly that if we're not really seeing the response, he's going to have to, shift course and have a more firm and mandatory approach. As we do that, there's, nothing but opportunity to really think through what is the fairest way to implement that for systems, because this isn't a gotcha game on conservation. It really isn't. This is, and again, as we heard from Commissioner Touton, what we're needing to do on the Colorado, as we hear what our neighbor basin states are themselves also doing, this is all hands on deck, and we're looking to do our part and just appropriately help guide that, and know that there's an incredible amount of leadership up and down this state on conservation, and has been for decades, and was what gives me pride and hope that we can continue to do the same.
Thank you. So the issue of the drought on the Colorado River is something that you spoke about twice today, and it is a super unfortunate situation. Do you see the shortage on the Colorado River affecting California's water supply this year?
I mean, I think that writ large, the impacts on the Colorado River are impacting all the basin states. I mean, if you look at just the fact that California went from what 5.2 million acre feet, which is above our 4.4 right, but we were drawing from the river for a number of years until the quantification settlement agreement came along in 2000, which and that was again a moment where we had to shrink our footprint on the Colorado River here to meet our water right and to be able to, because of the growing demand from the basin states, be able to balance things out. We've been doing this, periodically, and most recently with a drought, previous drought shortage provisions here that we're trying to fix these imbalances. So I think that have impacted California, right? I mean, and so I think writ large, yes, we have to expect impacts, but I think the important part is, and what the collaboration on the river has always been about, is folks coming to the table with what we can do to resolve the challenges. And here, very clearly from Commissioner Touton, the challenges are huge. The deficits and what we're seeing, and needing to really get honest with what the yields, the rational, reasonable yields can be on these projects, is coming to call. And so in California, although, yes, we have a senior right, our message here is that like with all the watersheds we're dealing with, it's all about how we can contribute to our solutions, not resting on an idea that anyone with a senior right is here somehow, should be sacrosanct or untouchable. These are challenging times, and it's going to be, the good faith and work of us all to acknowledge that we need to be doing more and can here collectively. And the imbalances on the river are huge, and we're at the tail end of that. So we're those aren't just water quantity challenges for California; those are water quality challenges as well. As we talk about increased salinity, the ability to reuse in Southern California is incredibly impacted by water quality coming from the Colorado River. So either way, we're impacted, and we're in it, and we're here to continue to make sure we're sending the right, not just message, but doing the right things policy-wise on conservation, on expanding our supplies, local supplies, to relieve the pressure from any one of these imported sources up and down the basins.
Can you share your thoughts on the tension between urban demands and urban conservation and agricultural conservation? Sometimes there's a tension there, and people might say, well, the urban sector only represents a small portion of demand, and there's diminishing returns there. But there seems that those tensions seem to be heightened during this drought. And if you can share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's natural for any moment like this, when things start to get pretty intense, for folks to start to say, well, am I doing too much? Is someone else not doing enough? And if that's the case, well, then why should I bother? I hear very clearly the numbers are such that, and folks on the Colorado River Basin have said this, water managers up and down, the urban side could serve all the way down to nearly nothing, and it still wouldn't right the imbalances that we have. But I think that, when we start to draw those narratives more, am I doing too much? And until someone else does a little more, I'm going to kind of be in a mode to not contribute. That quickly devolves us into a state that isn't very helpful. And we saw it in the last drought as well. And I think that what we have to do is treat honestly these tensions between urban and ag usage. Going back to that quantification settlement agreement that I mentioned, where California right-sized itself from its 5.2 million acre foot, diet to here it's legal right of 4.4. That required some shifting of, and that, you talk to IID, it's no secret that caused a lot of tension, that transfer of water from the ag to the urban side. And I think that, our colleagues and the sector, for some, they see that as a fundamental threat. And here, I don't. I think the reality is that we're all right-sizing our footprint. collectively as a society together to match what we can, again, rationally and reasonably expect from these exported watersheds. And to do that, it's going to mean we're going to have to get creative across the sectors and find out how we all contribute to a solution. But I think that, again, it's not a very helpful narrative to have one of a feeling at this point of, well, I'm going to kind of let's stop doing all we can here on one side of the ledger because we feel the other isn't doing anything. And I would note that the water board here is curtailing for the first time in California's history. And we know that it does have a huge impact on many ag communities. But here, and importantly, the message I'm receiving from water right holders is administer the water rights system. That's what we need to do in a time of shortage and a time of obvious inability to meet all water users' demand. And that's what the water rights system is there to do, is to progress through a rational and here way of managing our water and watersheds that doesn't fight us to the last drop. So we have to administer water rights, and here it again I see across the state, and in our job to balance and understand the impacts, incredible impacts on agriculture in rural communities, and a lot of people all here standing up and doing their part. And so I can understand where papers and narratives really you can draw out that tension for sure. Everyone loves to misquote Twain and say whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting, but he never said it, didn't. But it's a truism in the West, and it's something we tell ourselves because I think it helps us justify some of the worst behaviors that we have.
So there are some questions coming in from the audience. I want to ask one, I want to blend one from the audience and also one that came in previously, dealing with storage and funding. And this, I would admit, may not be entirely within the water board's purview, but it'd be great if you can reflect on this and maybe give us your thoughts. So I'll ask this question. What steps are the board members taking to expedite the implementation of the Prop 1 storage projects, as the governor has indicated he would like to see happen in his January 2022 water resilience portfolio?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And I'll note, Proposition 1 had a lot of dollars. And yes, there was the water storage investment program and the $2.7 billion that encompassed, but it was a $7 billion bond. And the dollars on water recycling, groundwater cleanup, stormwater capture, the things that we really know continue to increase and provide local supplies and resilience. Those are all out the door. Those are again going to valve turning projects on. So just because I know I often hear that, well, didn't California pass a bond and didn't we get nothing for it? And usually it centers around this narrative around where we are in storage projects, which are a lot bigger, more complex, and take in here, even before the bond was passed, these projects were all decades still in the development and making. So where the pressure and where the fault lies on why those projects aren't is a complex one. But the state is here to do its part. And the water board, particularly, our folks have been meeting with all the proponents of those various projects for years, monthly in many cases, for some of the larger ones like sites, and providing clear direction insofar as, okay, what is the board process? What is it that the board will be evaluating? How is it that the project proponents can come to the board with information that allow us to make decisions? The decision making before the board, of course, is not uncomplex, and the way to be able to get to better decisions sooner is being able to have the information to make those decisions. And so glad to say that we've been certainly doing our part in ensuring that we have had a lot of discussion and continue to, and invite any project proponents, groundwater recharge projects out there, anything out there that folks know that you're going to need a water right, you'll need some board activity around. We're here for early consultation to be able to just talk through, okay, what is that process? And importantly, again, what is the information that needs to be brought to the board to be able to make us be able to see the project for its impacts and be able to have comfort in the decisions we're going to make. The looser that is, the more difficult that decision for the board, the longer you're going to be before the board in trying to proceed before your applications or projects. So I think that's the best way we can do it, and we have.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm going to read two questions that have come in from the audience that deal with desalination. I think both of them are helpful for the conversation about
oh yeah, definitely.
desal. So the first question is desal appears to be one partial solution to the amount of water available. Do you see the executive and legislative branches, as well as environmentalists, collaborating to build desal facilities? And if I can also ask another question that came in regarding desal, with the Coastal Commission's unanimous vote against the Huntington Beach desal project after 20 plus years of planning and permitting, is there any future in our state for seawater desalination projects? And if so, what can be done to move these projects forward more quickly?
Thank you for the question. And desal is really important. It's a tool in our toolbox, and one that I look up and down the state and we're currently using. Again, I just went to a valve turning for a desal facility. Here, it was a desalter for groundwater that is less, brackish groundwater that's less salty than the ocean. And I think whenever we talk about water, and I know this is front of mind for so many of the water managers and agencies in our state, we talk about affordability. And here, where your cheapest sources of water are, and here, not too many left. We've pretty well, tapped what are our cheapest sources. And so from there, is why we see so much more stormwater capture happening, so in which was more an unfunded liability for in the eyes, I know, of many municipalities, as opposed to what it is increasingly becoming, which is viewed as a resource, and importantly viewed as a resource, one that, yes, comes at greater costs, but still is less than, say, desalting ocean water, which we all know is at the far end of that's your most expensive water that you can develop. And so I think desal as a technology, again, reverse osmosis is what we're talking about, and it's the same technology that's used in our recycled water projects and in desalters. And so I think it's about focusing on the technology, and there it's exciting to see that there have been advancements in membrane, defouling. Fouling of membranes is a big issue, having to replace the medium. And those are cost savings in the long term. The energy needed as well then to desalt or to purify, if you will. And again, it's whether you're talking about brackish groundwater, where you're talking about wastewater, and or ocean. It's all part of what is an important mix and portfolio, and I see up and down the state all the time, and will continue to be. And so I think it's important not to look at the Huntington Beach project, which has its own complex set of factors, a size issue, tied to a once-through cooling plant. And although the board's desal policy allows for that, it's not the preferred technology that's identified and has a more complex permitting path. All that to say, you shouldn't look at that vote and that project as a referendum on desalination in the West and or in California, because I know there are a number of projects out there, some also ocean water desal, but they're smaller. They use subsurface technologies. And here I think there's an important need to acknowledge that it's going to, and especially the decades ahead as we continue to grapple with what will be the yields from our various imported supplies, will be an important component. But I think of the direct potable reuse regulations that the board will adopt next year. I think of really the continuum of projects that use the technology, and I know there's a bright future.
So I'd like to ask a question that has come in from a member of the Environmental Caucus of the Water Forum. And I know I've had conversations with this individual quite a bit on this topic, but I'm going to ask you this question. What specifically is the board and other state agencies doing to assist in the transition of our built environment and its landscaping to match our climate?
We've I will say we're at we've been using Save Our Water. I'll say as our main sort of venue by which that we're providing funding, trying to connect agencies, and importantly connect to these themes of biodiversity and outdoor landscaping and funding. And so I know that the Department of Water Resources has here and through the governor a budget request for turf replacement. But really it's about, landscape conversion, if you will, and really making those investments. And so we're looking at those funds as opportunities, at least at the state level, to help drive that. And, the Save Our Water campaign as the arm of which we can, start to work across some of the groups that are truly involved and here we have models. I think of Molten Miguel Water District in Southern California, where I know June Lopez and Drought Water have been doing incredible leadership work and connecting just this very discussion around native plants, biodiversity, and changing out landscapes. And I think that there's a real opportunity to better create jobs and a whole more focused industry around doing this work because of the conservation goals that we have, but also because of the biodiversity goals that we have. And this really neat opportunity to make sure that we're connecting the two. So there's a couple of spaces where it's starting and really, please come to us with ideas, and glad to be able to provide support.
Thank you. So let's get in the weeds a little bit. We've been there a little bit, but maybe a deeper path into the weeds. Are there new challenges the board is facing with maintaining Delta salinity standards as the drought worsens?
Well, the board relaxed through a temporary urgency change petition a number of those standards. Currently not. Actually, the projects have identified that they'll be able to meet salinity standards here through the summer. That was a huge goal and an important one for the projects to be able to try to meet some of these standards, even when there are drought or challenging conditions here. We're trying to move away from emergency response to drought and really understand how we manage through these conditions better, and not always pull the emergency cord and having to relax standards quickly. But we have been having to do so, and speaks to the challenge around salinity management. Most of at this point, as we update our standards, we'll have different things that peg our standards to what we aim for, but largely X2 and salinity is what guides our water quality standards and the projects. So and ultimately it's something the projects are definitely having to and will continue to struggle with, and we collectively as well. But a lot of those standards are met by flows from the projects, and so we're going to have to continue to get a more comprehensive understanding of salinity in the Delta, which is also actually very much tied to and part of salinity in the San Joaquin, and an export of salts through from that basin, and ultimately how we manage salts is really critical. I touched on that with water recycling and the impact on increasingly saline water from the Colorado River on our ability to reuse it in Southern California. But here in the Central Valley, we know we have huge salt challenges, similar to the West writ large, where we're really needing to make sure that because it so impairs both land and water use, how we're managing salt for the long term. And it gets really complex in the Delta when we talk about sea level rise and other factors for sure.
Mr. Chair, if I could ask you a question about affordability. The Water Board Low Income Rate Assistance Report says, quote, substantive restrictions on rate making by publicly owned water systems prevent subsidization of one customer's water rates by another, and would pose serious, if not fatal, obstacles to publicly owned water systems funding individual water low income rate assistance programs from water rates and charges. unquote. One way around this is to have a statewide program, which is being discussed in the legislature. The Temporary Low-Income Household Water Assistance Program, or LIHEAP program, is working well from our perspective because it utilizes existing local service providers and information to effectively connect individuals with assistance programs they qualify for. Do you think a similar model could help work or could satisfy WLIRA?
I appreciate the question, and I'm really proud. I have to actually start with the fact that this year is the 10th anniversary of California's human right to water. We have had here then in the California Water Code a human right to water for a decade. And as I noted, the Division of Drinking Water came over to the state board in about 2015. And so, all of this has meant that California has had a very robust discussion around supporting systems, supporting access to water. And this issue of affordability is one that I'm proud that we've been able to, along with so many leaders in the state and water agencies, better explore. How do we even capture metrics around affordability? That's now in our drinking water needs assessment. I just have to put a plug there. Please, folks, go to the dashboard that encompasses all the data we have there. Metrics on affordability, accessibility, quality, risk, ultimately, of systems to fail has been incredible and important to us better understand all the ways in which the board impacts affordability. We know we do so whenever we consider maximum contaminant limits. And certainly when we are funding projects, from the state revolving fund or with grants, that it contributes importantly to the affordability of access to water in communities. But when it comes to then, at the ratepayer level, at the household level, there are challenges. And we know 218 ties the hands of water agencies from being able to have more flexible rates that, in other sectors, there are more, there's low income rates and or assistance. And I think it's important to note, and really acknowledge and very thankful for CSD and the work that they've done to implement the federal it's the LIHEAP equivalent for water. It's the low-income water assistance program, but it's important to note that it's not a low-income rate assistance program insofar as it's a crisis assistance program. So if you find yourself behind on your bills, I believe it's then that it triggers it, as opposed to a rate assistance, which is more ongoing and providing a flat subsidy, perhaps through. So when we talk about affordability, I think it's important to recognize just the range of programs and ways that we can possibly get. And yes, that model is one of them, a crisis assistance one, or a household by household model. And I'll note, though, that the Water Board recently executed a successful debt forgiveness program where we took COVID debt, both for drinking water and wastewater, and we forgave, and ultimately, here got out, 500 million plus to households that were that had debt. We got them those funds not through an individual household by household program, but at the system level, where we worked with the water systems themselves. They reported to us what their debt was and their accounts, and we then cut checks for that amount and had due diligence around needing to be able to see that it touched individual accounts, et cetera. And that I felt was incredibly successful because, and we reached here 80% of Californians represented by water agencies, and huge reach, and because we worked at the system level. And so I think right now what there is a really needed and robust discussion around affordability in the legislature, and this administration itself has put dollars toward, when you think of the arrearage program that the board executed. And then here, I know additional dollars we're giving to CSD to be able to complement the federal dollars for the crisis assistance program that's out there. And so, yeah, I think that it's exciting because we have this ecosystem, if you will, of programs, and I think that each of them kind of shines a light and lets us better understand how ultimately we might have a program that is fair and that gets around some of these challenges we have. We know around Prop 218 or or other implementing challenges that we certainly saw when we went to actually pay down this debt and these arrearages. A number of agencies transfer debt actually to the county and county rolls, and it goes to property. And there's this whole this learning experience that we're all in the middle of. So appreciate the question, and I think that it's going to definitely be part of a discussion, a needed one, because whether it's conservation, whether it's reinvestment in our aging infrastructure, all of it is requiring us to make sure we're keeping an eye on affordability and ensuring that we can maintain access for everybody, even as we make these very needed and important investments, which will come at cost.
Chair Esquivel, we're coming to near the end of our program here, but I wanted to ask if you. There were so many questions that we've received, and unfortunately we can't get through all of them. I was hoping that you might take a minute to talk about the recent Water Board resolution condemning racism, xenophobia, bigotry, racial injustice, and strengthening the commitment to racial equity, diversity, inclusion, access, and anti-racism. If you could spend a minute talk about that and the implementation, and then if you could just sort of give your last remarks, that'd be great.
I really appreciate the question. I'm incredibly proud of what our staff, and importantly the discussion we were able to have in the development of the resolution, and that we're already now moving on to our action plan. The words are nice, and actually it took us a little time. I know that what really was such a strong catalyst and impetus was the tragic murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, so many others, and here a feeling and a moment of real feeling of crisis around the discussion of race, the need to elevate and here acknowledge our own role as a government agency and entity, and acknowledge that these are very difficult discussions. These are incredibly personal discussions. I know I come to any of this with my own biases. I know that I come to with great humility a discussion around race, and it is not here something that we took lightly, but I felt very important, and especially because government, we're not really equipped for these discussions either as government entities, but I think we needed to communicate, not unlike say our climate change resolution or other moments, our clear commitment, and acknowledge that not unlike, say, climate change, racial inequity is a huge predictor of access to clean water. And when you see, and we know the redlining that's gone on that is purposely not extended municipal service or clean water or sanitation to communities, it becomes imperative that we acknowledge and understand it so that we don't repeat. And in fact, that we hear, understand our ability through our programs or our funding or what it is we're doing, that we not continue to reinforce what was ideal decision making, to say the least. And I think that what I'm proud of is you look at Governor Newsom, and early on in his administration to apologize, to admit wrong on behalf of the state of California for the genocide, true genocide that took place in this state against Native Americans is powerful. And I think it's important though, because I think we have to recognize that we're reconciling these systems that we've inherited, both the physical water systems, we'll say, but also these discussions and narratives around who's worth being served water, who's worth having a water right. And so I'm proud of the work that was done there. I think that here it's us trying to do our part. And as I said at the top here, you look 50 years ago, and all these discussions around the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, it was all at a time when the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, we were all very much acknowledging that these challenges are actually intertwined. And if we don't see them, if we don't talk about them, if we don't understand them, we're not going to make different decisions. We're not going to move past them, and actually they'll continue to haunt us and find ways that will trip us up. And so it is a difficult discussion. I come to it with great humility, but I feel that what it has allowed us to do is to talk about things that aren't easy, but are necessary.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Esquivel, and thank you for the opportunity to have this coffee chat this morning.
Thank you.
And
this has been fantastic. And I know that there are a lot more questions, and I just know that I welcome them and always glad to just speak honestly and appreciate this engagement truly and your just invitation. And so when it comes to the other questions, I'll see if there's a way to maybe try to get some response back out. And then otherwise, I just look forward to other opportunities where, I may see any of you, or we all may be able to talk about some difficult things, but some exciting things. And, we're all connected and part of here. So thank you. Really appreciate it, Jim.
On behalf of the Regional Water Authority, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thank you.
Have a good 4th.